Hello and welcome to today's webinar. So today we are, of course, talking about the opportunity that's been created through this new class MA, the opportunities that's created, and really today what we're trying to do is to kind of put that into perspective. I'll spit my words out. And really kind of explain what the size of this opportunity is, what it means, how we as developers, investors, and of course property professionals trying to make these deals kind of work, what it all kind of means to us. And to help me through that, I have a rather special guest today, and that is none other than my big brother, Simon. Hi, Simon, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you very much. How are you doing, Paul? Long time no see.
I know, yes, I've missed you so much. And so, really, I suppose where we want to get to today is we want to kind of look at Class MA, Class E, all that kind of stuff, and understand sort of what it means and how we kind of get there. So I suppose, perhaps, how do we want to start, Simon? We start perhaps with sort of casting our minds back a little bit, shall we? Do you want to just kind of run through that?
So just take on a bit of a journey. Should we just remind ourselves of how we got started in all this, I guess, Paul, isn't it, really? So, so what, 10, 11 years ago, we were probably merrily kind of minding our own business, doing a few developments, buying a few sites and stuff like that.
Minding your own business, were you?
Yeah, minding my own business, yeah. Keep it nice and quiet. But so let's cast our minds back, and we bought a pet shop in Warwick Street in Leamington Spa. And it doesn't half remind me of the sort of dead parrot sketch out of Monty Python. I probably found a few dead parrots in there, but fundamentally, this shop, if you recall, Paul, it was I think brought to us by a local agent, but by and large, it had not been. It hadn't changed hands about 35 years. Obviously, an owner operator kind of got a pet shop. The world had moved on, much more sort of corporates coming into it. So we had a look around this property and realized that, you know, it was a shop downstairs and sort of ancillary, tertiary, whatever you want to accommodation and sort of backyard, etc. on that side. And clearly there was zero value being applied to the sort of certainly the secondary and certainly the tertiary, but maybe some of the secondary space. And this gave us the opportunity to say, well, look, this building actually upstairs is probably more valuable than the building downstairs. So of course, it was kind of one of the, you know, early stages, a sort of mixed use, sort of commercial uses, change of uses, sort of opportunities that we looked at, wasn't it, in the centre of Leamington? And fundamentally, what we did is well, long story short, I guess, Paul, isn't it? We converted that building from a shop with lots of ancillary accommodation to a cafe, which I think is one of the most popular cafes. And ultimately, we put in, if I remember rightly, 7 HMO units on the front and 12 units on the back. So we basically took a shop with loads of dead space into a cafe with about 19 student rooms in it. And obviously students, Leamington Spa, fantastic for Warwick University and the rest of it. So that was a sort of an early stage scheme that we've kind of looked at.
It's quite cool as well, because it's the world sort of pre-Class G and kind of all the PD rights we've now got. So this was kind of, I suppose, a more challenging world, because you're sort of going in, buying sites sort of unconditionally, going to get a planning ticket on it, without that kind of nice open door that we've got with things like Class G and Class MA and stuff at the moment. So
it was a challenge. I remember the local conservation officers sort of always coming around, because it was in a conservation area. It wasn't listed, if I remember rightly, but it was quite challenging. And it was listed
through the frontage. So I think the building next door was listed, and then the frontages were mentioned as part of it. So there was. And we had that problem with the conservation officer not letting us split the front room at the front. So there were 8 rooms at the front, wouldn't we? If we just had our own way, but he wouldn't let us split that front room as well.
But anyway, I think it helped on the VAT back in the day, didn't it? With it being a, you know, so anyway, so we reel forward probably about 5 years, and so, you know, there's the culmination of us trying to buy a site off a pub company, and that then culminated obviously then working for that pub company, and in effect applying the same principles here and go, well, I've got this building, we feel it's underutilized, undervalued. How do we then go and create value out of it? And of course, we then apply that sort of methodology across 4,000, I think, pubs at the time, about 6 years ago. And that then unlocked or unearthed about £100 million worth of value for that company. And they, you know, very kindly put it in their public accounts to say that we found, you know, there's £100 million of additional property that their valuers hadn't previously recognized, had it? They did a valuation every 6 months, but this was like non-core. This is stuff that they hadn't even seen, and they recognized that. And I think we probably, or between us, had unlocked about 11 million of that £100 million by the time these accounts got put together. And I think one of the I suppose, best sites we ever did for them was sort of the property down in Farnham, wasn't it? Which was an absolute corker.
We kind of got there. There was a bit of a slide that we put together around kind of the impact that analysis had, actually, which is from the Estates Gazette back in 2019, end of 2019, I think, and sort of a little graph on that sort of left-hand side there that shows the number of planning applications that went in on pubs and sort of change of use of pubs in effect, which was really kind of driven off some of the analysis that we applied to that estate, part of that 100 million quid being unlocked as it went forward in effect, wasn't it? As you say, one of the...
So we did the work about 6 years ago, and then you can kind of see, once you unearth those opportunities, there was a significant spike in the planning applications on pubs into residential, as the Estates Gazette said. But of course, we then started to have the problems with assets community value. The legislation almost came in to try and close the door on some of these opportunities that we've been working on. So that made it more challenging, I suppose, to do that. But as I was saying, I think one of the best opportunities that we ever unearthed and the lowest risk was this cracking opportunity in Farnham, where we had a tapas bar downstairs, which I think had fallen over quite a few times, hasn't it? And they were looking to sell it. And I think, if I remember right off the top of it, it's making about 25 grand in rent or something ridiculously low, but it still couldn't survive as a tapas bar in that location. So as part of that review process, sort of we came along, didn't we? And we looked at it. We knew through contacts, I think at the time, that there was a demand for a Cafe Nero in that location. And basically Cafe Nero came along. We said, well, what can we do? How can we put Cafe Nero in downstairs? Because they weren't interested in the upstairs. How can we put them in downstairs? At the time, I think Farnham was probably £550, £600 a square foot or something like that. So there is significant amount of latent value upstairs. Cafe Nero on the downstairs. How do we sort of get this mixed use scheme together? So if I remember, we basically said to Cafe Nero, well, you're going in, you're going to fit out. We need access to the top floor. We're going to need some kind of double skim of plasterboard to be able to put the fire retardation between the ground and the first floor. And if I remember right, we basically said, I think it was a 70 grand a year lease on a 15-year unbroken term. We said, we'll give you 10 grand, put a staircase in. While you're doing your work, do some extra works upstairs. And that released the upper floors to a developer. Now, frustratingly, I think we could have done even more with that building by actually doing the development into the residential itself, but our hands were tied. We weren't allowed to do residential developments at the time, so we basically told that we could, do the scheme to that point and then sell it to a developer. I think there's probably about £250,000 of extra developers' profit by taking the upstairs into residential and then sort of selling that on. And I think the guy that bought it from London was super happy with it, because not only bought a solid income stream from Cafe Nero, you also got the opportunity to add value on top of that. But I remember they were talking about shifting that building about 400 grand, and we actually got 1.5 million for them, which was quite remarkable. And I think it's kind of
the bit that I really like about it is the fact we never actually touched it. Do you remember that? We never actually touched the building. It was all done through the paperwork. So it was the pre-let to Cafe Nero with the schedule of landlord's works as part of the agreement for lease. They did it all, and we got a planning ticket on it, and the value shot up. It was brilliant, wasn't it?
Yeah. So this is all well and good for working client side, which we did, but how does that help our community of sort of investors and developers trying to find sites? So we've talked about this in a previous webinar. I mean, we think there's 3 ways to find sites really in effect, aren't there, Paul? So there's this sort of traditional, off market. So basically, well, maybe could you put the side into the on market? So the more one that people are familiar with is probably the on market opportunity. So there's a board outside the building. It might be with the local agent, it might be with the national agent, it might be in an auction, for example. It might be in a set of particulars. So the traditional stuff that's on the market, we're more familiar with that, I guess, buying our own houses with Rightmove and Zoopla and things like that. But then, of course, there's these off-market opportunities. And to be honest, there's 2 that we believe are sort of the version 1, which is what we were very familiar with working in our little patch in Leamington and Warwick and the sort of West Midlands, which, you get a good relationship with the local agents, and you're probably on their shortlist of top 6 or 10 people. If they know that a client wants to sell something, they might just say to you, look, before we go on the open market, would you like to see this property with sort of a more exclusive a group of you? And they might put a draft set of particulars and they'd give it to you from a friendly agent. there's a fair few, you know, glasses of port or cans of Stella on the first tee at Kenilworth Golf Club at 8:30 in the morning to get that relationship going and stuff like that. But I think what we're finding at the moment that obviously post-pandemic it's very difficult to do that sort of stuff. So obviously there's the version 2 of off-market, which is very much down to the developer and investor and taking control of their own destiny and actually going to find the sites themselves, dig out those opportunities, and then just write to the owners to see whether, you know, what they want to do. They call this sort of direct to vendor stuff is a terminology we hear quite a lot. So our marketplace is clearly using that as a sort of strategy. And then there's opportunities. Well, how do I find these opportunities? Because I want to go to the vendor, I want to get some control of it. How do I find them? So the direct to vendor clearly works incredibly well compared to the others because of you know, you've got control of that because you haven't got anybody else in the loop. You've got the owner. Well, you've got as much control as you possibly can because you're talking to the owner directly. You can scale it, so you can send 100 letters, you can send 1,000 letters out, you can send 10 letters out. So you're kind of in control of that scalability if you've got the right conversion rates. And if you find the right sites, they're always on profile. You don't have to wait to receive stuff and have to filter. If you go out digging your own projects out of there, you know that the site you're looking at is on profile. It's just whether then you can build that relationship with the vendor. Is the vendor going to come willing? Obviously there's pros and cons of off market through the particulars to the local agents, and there's on market stuff, and we sort of had a separate discussion around that. But I think what we're really focusing on, a lot of our community are working very much on the off market direct to vendor letters situation. And then we say, well, this is great. Well, how on earth do I then go and find these sites? Because you're going to be sort of, you know, looking for that needle in a haystack and sending lots of letters out, and it's going to be a scattergun approach, which, you know, doesn't really help you very much. So how do I find those sites with this fantastic opportunity, I suppose, with the relaxation and some of the planning, and how do I then scale that and find these direct to vendor sort of opportunities?
Sure.
Really, Paul, perhaps you could just explain a bit more.
Actually, just sort of around that was that sort of, so we do these sort of deal clinics. We do one yesterday and one last week and the week before and this sort of stuff. And one of the things that always strikes me about that is that a lot of the stuff that people bring forward to those clinics is there's this thing on the market that I've been looking at. There's this thing here went to auction, didn't sell, I think I can get it at a good price and this sort of thing. And what I tend to find that we end up doing is we're sort of in this sort of world here where you're kind of either slightly off market because a set of particulars been sent to you by an agent because it didn't sell or whatever that might be. And you end up in this kind of this world of forensically trying to pick through the information around all of that. And I think part of the beauty of that off market when you're letter campaigning yourself is that you haven't got that same problem. You haven't got the sort of always there's a building here that kind of looks interesting, because all buildings kind of look very similar. You know, they're kind of a brick skin with a roof and a floor slab. And actually that kind of that forensic bit that you're doing, saying, well, actually, what kind of building is this one that's getting sent through to me is one that I think is something that I see a lot of when people are kind of just looking at that kind of on market / sort of vaguely off market, because it's kind of an agent's kind of found it, sent it to 10 people and you're kind of one of those 10 in effect. And that's one of the sort of key benefits, I think, of that off market letter campaigning, is that you flip that round. So you know it's kind of got, it's on profile, it's got the right planning behind it, it's got the right things. And then of course the owners, they're not in a desperate rush to go and sell this thing and get the price, because they've got up 3 other people that have bid unconditionally and trying to work out, well, do I work with you on a conditional basis? So you have less control over all of that. So I think that's kind of a key thing, really. But I guess the next thing is kind of, let's talk about Class MA.
Class MA. Tell us a bit more about Class MA, Paul, because this is a massive opportunity here to sort of for our marketplace to sort of capitalise on, isn't it? Really.
Sure. Well, let's get back to the basics. So the basic principle of Class MA is that it takes, what is this thing called? There's kind of lots of classes that are talked about at the moment, because it's kind of all a bit confusing, but they're kind of classes out of different bits of legislation. So you have to bear with me. But in essence, the first thing is you get the new use class, so new use class order, which is Class E. This is kind of broader commercial use Class E. You can then use Class MA, which is a permitted right in effect, to then convert that use Class E into residential. So that's what kind of Class MA is all about. So first off, what is Class E? What are the uses that kind of sit within Class E? Well, this is a little screenshot from Litchfield's kind of a really nice little document they created, which kind of helps you understand what the old what the use classes were in old money and what they are in new money in effect. So kind of where the A1s converted to A3, into E's and all this kind of stuff, and F2s and that kind of stuff. Let's have a little look at this. So in essence, what we've got, so this is the old use classes here, and this is the new use classes as of sort of last September in effect. And the key things to note is that the majority of shops are now Class E. The bits that aren't are kind of the last shop in the village. Those sorts of things are the ones that aren't part of Class E. That's kind of this new F2 community use thing. The old A2 uses, so banks and financial services and bookmakers and all that kind of stuff, then go into Class E. Cafes and restaurants under the old A3 use, those now go into are now in Class E as well. Pubs, which we did quite a lot of, have moved to sui generis, the old A4, and takeaways, A5, have gone into sui generis as well. You've then got all the old B1 uses in effect. So you've got your offices, you've got your light industrial buildings and your R&D buildings. Those are now all in Class E, but your B2 kind of heavy industrial, if you like, stays as B2, and your B8 distribution stays as B8 as well. The other thing to kind of note, really over on the other side of this, is sort of D1, the health clinics, the creches, the day nurseries, the day centres, those things are now part of Class E. The schools and non-residential bits of Class D1 have actually gone to F1, so they're not included. So it's just the clinics, the day centres, the health centres, the doctors' nurseries, all that kind of stuff that go into Class E. And then the old D2 use has split as well. So you've got cinemas, concert halls, bingo halls, and dance halls that have gone to sui generis. But the gyms and the indoor recreation, not involving the motorsports bits, is also in Class E. You've got this really big, broad use. So you can sort of see this kind of, I don't know whether it's kind of taupe coloured or kind of this sort of light blue colour. All of those uses are now part of Class E. So Class E is what the Class MA PD rights apply to. So that's what Class E is. So as we said, broader use Class E that then has Class MA PD rights in some cases to convert it to residential. So the big question then is, well, let's kind of move from Class E. So we know what those uses are that we can apply this stuff to. So this is then what it actually.
Can I just, so basically, Class E is like a massive sweeper of all these other use classes. So rather than like we had with hobbies, we had to go from A1 to A3 to get a cafe. That was a planning application on its own. Then you've got a planning application to say, well, how do I convert the other bits into an HMO for student accommodation? So it's like a double pain journey to go through. But what they've done is they said, well, forget about all of that. All of these sort of mercantile classes, or the use classes, massive sweeper into one Class E, isn't it? Which is a massive benefit to the developers to say, well, I've only got one step in the process, and then they've made that step from that to there. So I don't have to then go, well, how do I get from a pet shop to a cafe? That's no longer a problem, which is a massive help in its own right, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think there's kind of some interesting sort of nuances around sort of Class E as well, in terms of whether there's value to be had by switching those uses around. And whether there's, whether you sort of draw random lines across this, saying, well, what if I take one over here and take it over to there, or I take one over here and take it to there? Can I use a day nursery as an office and drive values up? Possibly, actually. And so there's kind of the odd little intricacy around all of that, but not quite
complicated for now, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So that's what the new use Class E is all about. It's bringing all these different old commercial uses, which all had different kind of styles of buildings, different things they were doing inside them, and changing use between them was a planning application, as you say, and that might involve various reports to prove that you could do it in this sort of. Now it's all the same thing.
Or conditions again, isn't it? You might be put on. Yeah. So
absolutely. So what then becomes the case is you can then apply that Class MA, as I say, to it. So there's mercantile to abode, all these different uses, moving those into residential, and there's a few things that stop those. A few kind of constraints, if you like, a few things that you have to make sure the building is sort of fits within those constraints in order to be able to apply this new Class MA to it, in effect. And those things are these. So the first thing is that the building mustn't be bigger than 1,500 square meters. That's quite a big building. That's kind of nearly 16,000 square feet. It's quite a big old lump of a building, frankly. It's not allowed in what's called Article 2.3 land. So you can't do it in areas of outstanding natural beauty. You can't do it in special protection areas. You can't do it in the Broads. You can't do it in national parks. You can't do it in World Heritage sites. You can't do it in SSSI, so site special scientific interest. You can't do it in safety hazard zones. You can't do it in military explosive areas. So I'm not quite sure
you want to do it anyway.
I was going to say, yeah. And you also can't do it to listed buildings either. So this is kind of where I talk about this kind of forensic thing. If you're kind of on market, you get a set of particulars. You're sort of going through a tick list and saying, well, is it not? Is it? So it's kind of quite a time-consuming problem that you sort of face in effect. For Class MA to apply, it has to be empty for 3 months as well. So you have to have the building vacated 3 months before the prior application, the prior approval goes in for the PD rights, if you like. And the building has to have been in use Class E for a minimum of 2 years, or one of the use class. Obviously, Class E itself hasn't been around for 2 years, but in effect, one of those other uses. So before that, it was in Class A1, which is now Class E, and therefore it was in Class E back then, in effect. So provided you hit those sort of 4 things, then you can then apply these PD rights to that building, in effect. It's a prior approval rather than PD. It's slightly nuanced. So it's a planning application, sort of a watered down planning application with an open door, rather than submit a prior approval. Submit a certificate of law and just do it kind of thing. It's a little bit more than that, but it's not a lot more. And actually, a lot of the things that sit behind it in terms of that planning application are things you want to do anyway. So things like minimum space standards and natural light and this sort of stuff are the kind of things you want in a flat anyway. So it's kind of in my head.
When we see constraints like this relating to property, what do we go and do, Paul? We go, well, surely if we've got all the data around all of these constraints and there are 30 odd million properties, and we're basically saying, well, how do we find those proactively by putting those filters on to meet these requirements?
Yeah, sure. And I suppose that's kind of where our kind of mindset, I suppose, isn't it? Is that this sort of size of the UK, every building in the UK in effect is like a row in an Excel spreadsheet, just like this one just here in effect, with a load of things that tell you what it is. So it's in Class E and it's this big and it's listed or it's floods or all that kind of stuff in effect. And so what we've done is we've got our data science team here run a little kind of calculation, it's quite a big calculation actually, but they've used quite a lot of technology to do it. But in essence, what they've done is they've run a filter for Class E properties across the UK, and they've then filtered that down so that it's less than 1,500 square meters in size, less than 16,000 square feet, of course. One of the interesting things that they've also done, which is something I'm quite passionate about, actually, I don't know if you've seen some, but there's a little road that's in Warwick that I was driving back down this week, and it's kind of interesting. So it's sort of around the back of Warwick, and there's a sort of industrial area that's sort of where you get your tyres fixed. And I'm around the back there. In fact, there's a whole row of
I don't drive like you, Paul. So it's all right. I don't get through my tyres like you today.
I drive very carefully. Thank you very much. But in essence, there's this whole area of kind of industrial buildings, and they sort of range from sort of crinkly tin sheds through to kind of the old mill type buildings, kind of 3-story big old barn kind of things. As you drive down this road, there's kind of crinkly tin shed, then you've got this kind of old mill, and you've got some sort of tired old sort of club kind of premises. Then you've got another mill, then you've got 6 executive flats, then another mill, and for me, those sorts of schemes are the ones that don't really fill me with a lot of confidence, because I don't really feel like that scheme sat between those sort of, on the one side I've got a car garage, on the other side I've got some sort of old mill that's being used as some kind of quasi office space / whatever. And actually that noise and that sort of feel about it, it's like when you get a set of particulars and you go, well, can I make this work? It's like, well, the numbers stack up, I can get a consent on it, I've got this deal, do I do it or not? And you sort of look at it and go, well, it sort of works. And when you then sort of look at yourself, look yourself in the mirror in the cold hard light of day and say, well, is that a scheme I should be doing? I sort of feel like in that case it's not. So what we've done with this is it's a long way of explaining. We've added a residential feel to it. So we've made sure that these buildings aren't those kind of buildings stuck in the middle of what is a kind of a commercial space, trying to sort of force a scheme through it in effect.
So basically, so we basically looked at the subject property. So once we've calculated this, we look at the subject property and say, well, is there a residential feel? And how do you get residential feel? Well, you get out the data. You can see what's the density of the surrounding area in terms of residential. Is it abutting residential buildings and stuff like that? So it's kind of like, this is not, here's a raw data set of everything, and it, as you said, it looks like it stands out like a sore thumb. It's not. It's the data team have then gone and calculated, well, does it feel like a residential area? Not like having looked at it with a human eye, but there is a way that we've created an algorithm almost to say, this is a residential feel, and that's another filter goes into those sites. So
absolutely, I think the reason for that, so I don't remember this kind of when we were doing all that work for Punch, we're sort of putting all these planning applications in. sort of, you were the other side of this. So you sort of get, in effect, you get sent a list of all these pubs, and you sort of say, well, actually, is it right to convert this one to residential? You sort of try and work out, well, where is the bar for it, yes or no? And sort of then you kind of get committed to it. You spend a lot of time on it, and it's sort of, you kind of try and work out whether it's right or not. And
well, especially if you were keeping the pub, because you're basically building a residential next to a boozer, aren't you, with the car park sometimes. If you take a bit of that, so you've got to then think, well, is that going to affect the value of this? And it's a balance between, if I'm going to keep it, I'm going to do a dual site, in effect. What does that look like? In the same way, putting a cafe or a takeaway downstairs, obviously takeaway is now in a sui generis use. You know, if you put that downstairs and you've got the smells from a fish and chip shop, it may affect the value upstairs and other things like that. So you've always got that kind of, what's the adjoining properties, that feel, is it going to affect the two together? Are they going to work? Is in effect what we're saying, isn't it? If we do take this out, does the two adjoining properties, the new two adjoining properties, going to work? So that's sort of what the team are very cleverly done, to be honest.
That's absolutely it. And I think sort of the it's quite interesting with hindsight, really, because when you look back at that stuff we did for all the pubs, the schemes that we didn't get consent on, that we tried to get consent on, were kind of very much in that sort of ballpark of, well, we're kind of forcing this. We kind of think it's okay, but we're forcing it. And the ones that did get consent were the ones where we didn't do that, and where it was just a very natural, sympathetic thing that we were putting in place there. And that's really kind of what this is doing, is making sure that sort of, that, I suppose, the rationality that you have when you look back in hindsight, as opposed to the emotional commitment you've got to a scheme when you're trying to progress it, in effect, is putting that into the search, in effect.
But let's not forget, when we did the pub work, we didn't have the database that we have now, and we had 4 members of staff doing all the aggregation of the data manually into a different database. So it's kind of, that's moved on. We didn't have the data to be able to filter out in the first instance. That's where the difference is now, isn't it? The data is now linked and it's everything. You can proactively do it. So that was the reactive world, even though we thought we were, well, clearly unversed some value, even through in an old reactive world, wasn't it, I suppose? But
absolutely. And then, of course, Class MA doesn't apply to certain things, doesn't apply in Article 2.3. So we removed that out of the list of properties.
Okay. So what does this all mean then, Paul? What does this all mean? Once we've done this, what does it?
Well, let's shoot forward. Let's sort of skip forward. So what we've achieved then, or what we've managed to unearth, is there's 83,500 properties that sort of match those characteristics, in effect, which is tickle under 180 million square feet of space that applies to that, which is currently worth about 35 billion, in effect. That kind of opportunity, I suppose probably we were quite interested in that opportunity, weren't they? But, using our data to run through that. But in essence, that's kind of what the sort of the size of the prize is, in effect. As we kind of look at, well, how does that work financially? That's sort of 35 billion pounds worth of property, in effect, would have a GDV of 80 billion, just tickle under 81 billion, actually, in terms of GDV converted into residential in the areas that those buildings obviously sit. It'll cost just a tickle under 19 billion to convert those into residential, and that leaves a 27 billion pound profit across that opportunity, in effect, with all of those characteristics filtered out, with the residential feel to those properties as well, to make sure that they all work neatly. Yeah. And of course, what that means, given there's 80-odd thousand of those properties, in essence, the average scheme looks like this. So it's got a GDV of 970 grand. It's got a purchase price of about 420,000, construction costs of about 225, which then gives a profit of 327,000 against that, which is a 51% return on cost and effects. So that's what the average scheme looks like. It's about 80-odd thousand.
So what we're saying, Paul, is to calculate this, the whole spreadsheet, the sums at the bottom, it said, look, if it was one big property, it's 80 billion pounds of GDV, purchase price is 35. It's a very simple equation. We already have to spend 18, 19 billion converting into it. If it was one big property, I'm sure something like Blackstone would go and buy it, and they would cash in on that 27 billion pound property, and they'd probably pay quite a lot of money for that spreadsheet as well, wouldn't they, I guess, Paul, if it was a single opportunity in that sort of nugget. But of course, there's 80,000 properties in there. You start breaking it down start breaking down individual sites, then it's absolutely perfect for the SME sort of developer. We were, doing our stuff in Merrily Away in the sort of Midlands area. So you're talking just sub £1 million on average as a GDV. and a purchase price out, but fantastic ROI of sort of 50%. But bearing on, you're talking about converting buildings, so it's relatively high return for low risk, aren't you? You're not knocking it down and starting again. You're taking existing building envelope and you're internally changing it around. It's a much lower risk development opportunity, but still making some cracking sort of returns for that sort of SME marketplace, isn't it? I mean, the other thing is, I think, just remind, when we did the development spreadsheet, this is not averaging out from a 0% profit. There's a minimum profit level before we put those properties into the spreadsheet, wasn't it? I think they capped out at 20%, 25%. So we've not put anything in the spreadsheet that doesn't physically make sense. It's not like I'm going to go and buy a property for £500,000, spend £500,000 and sell it for £1 million, because you're going to get a bag of crisps out of that whole development plan. So there's a minimum development profit in
those are the schemes where you say, well, are you sure it's £1 million GDV? Are you sure it's not 1.1? And you sure it's £500,000 bill cost and not 450? And you sure we can't squeeze 15% out of that? Those are the deals that aren't in there. That's
exactly. Making up the appraisal to create a value rather than saying, look, on the basics assumptions, it makes 50% return. So
we have been there, haven't we? We didn't buy many like that, but we have been there.
We have, yeah. Well,
to be honest. Fabulous. Right. So that's what it looks like. That's what the kind of the size of the opportunity is. That's what the opportunities then look like in effect. And what I'd like to do next is,
how do we find these, Paul? How do we find these?
Well, I want to do my well, that's what the next slide says. How do we find it? What I'd like to do, this is the prop tech equivalent of a magician at a school, at a child's birthday party. What I'd like to do is I'm going to do my pick a card, any card. So if in the chat we could have people put in a location into the chat for me of where they would like me to go and find some Class MA PD right opportunities, then we'll.
You said Bristol, Paul. Do you want Bristol?
Bristol, Romford, Coulson, Kingston. Let's have a little play. There we go. Gosh, the chat sparked up, hasn't it? Let's jump in this. So this is my version of Nimbus. And so we said, where did we say first time? I've forgotten what we said.
We said Bristol, didn't we?
Bristol. Yeah, Bristol's cool. Let's go to Bristol. So Bristol is, of course, down here. That's showing you how wonderful my geography is. So this is the elite platform in effect. Let's just kind of get our bearings about Bristol. So the first thing that obviously this whole system relies on, the whole kind of search relies on, is saying, well, what are the sales values in an area? Are we comfortable that those values are correct? And kind of what's the quality of this area? So this is what we're kind of really leveraging, is this kind of average sales price in effect. So it's looking at kind of what are those areas, which are the good areas of town, and then kind of seeing, well, based on those values, what are the GDV? So it's using an inflated version of this. So, well, actually, what are the sales values in that particular area? So this little overlay here is showing sort of neighborhood boundaries to say exactly what are those neighborhoods, and then what are those sort of sales prices in there. So we're bringing comparables in that are.
It's a great way if you're unfamiliar with an area, for example, if you do go outside your patch, because obviously that's why people work within their patch, they feel fairly comfortable. If as soon as you start going outside and your knowledge starts to think, this is just a fantastic starting place. Well, what looks good? Where's a good resi area? Where's a bad resi? We all know that the other side of the road could be a council. Certainly in London, a council estate one side, you can have like £20 million houses the other side of the road. So it's like, where's that boundary? Where's the cutoff? Where does it? You just certainly don't want to be praising at one area in a bad area and things like that. So this is a great way to get a feel, isn't it, instantly? And that's obviously updated as resi values change and stuff like that. As a rate per square foot, isn't it? It's the normalization of resi values into a rate per square foot.
Absolutely. So it gives you kind of a feel for where those good areas are, sort of which are the good neighborhoods, which are the bad neighborhoods. And there's kind of some more detailed stuff we can do around that. But I'm going to kind of keep it high level for today. There's also things like, understand a little marketplace, so kind of HMOs, things like that. So the new Class MA, you can't apply the HMO conversions after that. It's kind of PD rights that like that. You can't do that with the Class MA. You can. There's sort of some tricks that we've sort of talked about in a previous webinar around all of that. But for today, we're going to sort of stay away from that. So this is showing me kind of where I want to be. So I'm going to sort of search in sort of some better parts of Bristol rather than just search anywhere. So I'm going to have a look over this sort of part here. So the new strategy is, of course, strategy number 9. So this in effect plots on the map all of those properties. So all of that stuff I've just sort of taken you through, all of that kind of filtration, the removing of listed buildings, is it Class E, is it not Class E, all of that stuff has been done for you. And of course, now I kind of know, well, this is a good part of Bristol. So I'm going to go sort of a little play around in Bristol and see what I can find in effect. So if I just go and pick some stuff at random. So what it's doing, it's also doing a little calculation in the background. So it's sort of saying, well, of that 80 billion sales prices and of the purchase price of how many billion that was, where does this one sit? What does this particular scheme look like? And it's then saying, well, actually, the ones that are particularly viable, it's colouring in a sort of a warmer colour. And the ones then that sort of tickle down sort of to 20%, 15% return on cost, it's then making them look a little bit kind of cooler. In fact, kind of the heat that's showing through on the map is the sort of how profitable those schemes are in effect. So I've got a little run up here, actually. I might go and just look up here because there's a whole bunch of stuff along this little street here, Vale Road, where I've got some quite strong values in effect. So what this is saying here, there's a property here. There's the little title number for it. It's Churchill Financial Planning. It's 13 Vale Road, Bristol. It's a 3,500 square foot office. So the office is the old B1 use. It's now part of Class E in effect. It's saying that in that area, it thinks that the sales price is about £500 a foot for your sale of that building once it's converted. And that on the 3,500 square feet is about 1.75 million sales values. Estimating a conversion cost in Bristol of £115 a foot. So we're going to take the existing fabric of the building and we're going to convert that into residential. We're going to leave the roof, we're going to leave the walls, we're going to probably do a bit of internal reorganization, some internal petitioning and this kind of stuff. But ultimately we're leaving the building itself as it is. So it's kind of about 2/3 of new build cost is what it's allowing for there. It's then saying that it thinks the rental level for that building is about £15.50. And if we were to pay a 6% net yield on that, then that would be 175 grand to go and buy it. So in essence, we've got to buy it for 875, pay 410 for it. It'll be worth 1.75 once that's done, which gives us a £500,000 profit. And that's a 40% return on cost for that particular building. So it's kind of
how do you get the conversion cost? Does the conversion cost include sort of your professional fees and stuff like that? Is that sort of aggregating stuff? Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
One of the questions somebody's asked is, does it include? Yeah. So we've put that in and inflated it for your normal professional fees and the rest of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's kind of this is really coming off the stuff that we've done historically. I don't know if you remember, Simon, but we sort of stumbled across a QS sort of on the journey where what they were doing was it's actually part of a SPON actually, where so the SPON pricing measure. In fact, what they do is they sort of say, well, actually, which bits of the building are you changing or not? And kind of you go through huge amounts of detail and give us like a 50-page report saying this is what I think the sort of the conversion cost is going to be. And typically when you kind of cut it down into sort of these basic principles, I'm not doing anything with the roof, I'm not changing the windows, I'm not building new walls, I'm just putting internal walls, and what's the percentage of that? In essence, kind of build this thing up. And it would come out at 2/3 of new build cost pretty much all the time. And so hence we've used that off the back of that, because that's kind of what we typically found the answer to be, frankly. So there's your sort of how we find those.
They change it, sorry, but it does change across the country as well. So that conversion cost is being calculated based on where we are in the country as well. So that
sure.
It will move around.
Whilst we all say there is a north-south divide, things are a lot more expensive to build in London than they are in sort of.
Well, this is east-west, but yeah, there is definitely.
Well, there's east-west as well. There's actually kind of it's a ripple effect actually out from London in effect, is where those build costs change in effect. So, but yes, there is unfortunately a north-south divide too. So, so that's kind of what that does. And of course, what we then said, well, actually, the whole point of this is that off-market letter campaigning. That's sort of the truly off-market stuff, is where you get control of the site, you get time to go and agree with the owner that I can pay you perhaps a little bit more than that sort of $875. I'll pay you $950 for it if you come on a journey with me. If you vacate, we get our PD rights, I get my planning consent. I'll pay you more than the building's worth if you come on that journey with me. But it's going to take us 12 months to get there, or 6 months to get there, depending on kind of how racy we're feeling in effect. That will trim our profits down, so that'll take 75 grand off the 500,000, but we're still way over 25% return on cost, so it's fine, thanks very much.
Yeah, and risk it and pass some of that profit on to them to sort of give them a bit of a carry in the project and stuff
Absolutely.
like that. But work with me to get the possession, work with me and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Share the risk with me, and off the back of sharing the risk with me, I'll give you a share of the profit. I'll do the work, I'll pay for the planning applications, but you come on the journey with me, and I'll remunerate you as part of that, rather than just whacking it on the market and just getting the best price you can, which is going to be somewhere around $875. Come on a journey with me, I'll pay you $950 for it, you're making a 10% on top of it, but it's going to take a little while. And of course, you've got no particular tearing great plans to sell this thing, any particular great.
Well, they might though. You never know though, because the changes in offices, the changes in our work-life patterns. You know, people are working from home, and so you don't know. You might just say to somebody, if you're an investor and you want a vanilla income and it's your retirement pot, you know, and then that's under threat now. You know, oh my goodness, I will have a conversation with you. Thanks very much. And you know, I'm concerned about that property now that it wasn't a concern to me pre-pandemic.
Absolutely. So there's the details of the property itself. Very simple for us just to kind of add that property to our workflow. It's owned by a private owner. Save it into a workflow. Click save. Put a little pin on it. And then kind of the simple thing then to do is just use our workflows. There's a very simple little download button at the top here. We just click that, pulls all this down into Excel, do a little mail merge, send your 100 letters out. For the back of your 100 letters, you're going to get 10 responses. Half are going to say, don't want to sell it to you now. The other half are going to say, well, let's have a chat. It's interesting you kind of wrote to me at this point. Off the back of that, you do a deal in 5. There's your deal done. It's really, really simple.
I mean, somebody else as well. Do we have some letter templates as well as part of our things. You can also download group PDFs on group office copies on. So on the private ownership, you can download bulk office copies on that, and then we check if you've downloaded it before. So if you make a mistake yourself, obviously they try and download it again. We will tell you you've already downloaded it, so don't do it again. I know it's only £3, but you know, £103 can get expensive. So we do that little check for you as well.
Yeah, sure. So in the workflow, you can either buy it on a site-by-site basis through here and just pop it into a basket and you buy it that way, or you can actually do it through the workflow itself. It's like a little bulk actions thing you can do. These little 3 buttons here that allow you to kind of just go and buy all those type of documents at the same time. What's kind of clever with that is that the system will take the owner's details off that. So where it's owned by Mr. and Mrs. Smith, live at 12 Acacia Avenue or whatever, it'll take those details off the title register that you bought and then load it into that spreadsheet for you. So kind of a very simple way of getting your mail campaigns going, getting them out, simple mail merge, send them off, thanks very much, off you go in effect. So it's really quite simple. It's kind of quite a simple way of achieving all of that. So all of those kind of key things, there it is there. I mean, there's probably a bit more to be done with that, isn't there? Look at this, you might get a bit more on than what it's aiming at, but it's sort of saying, well, there's your opportunity in effect. It's then obviously been pre-selected based on the fact that your Class MA works. It's kind of an interesting webinar coming next week. We're bringing Dan Taylor from Taylor Capital in, who sort of talked about that sort of Class MA being your backstop point of view in effect. So if you can get the scheme to stack up based on Class MA, and you know you can get your planning ticket on that, you can always go back in and say, right, I'm now going to knock the whole thing down with that planning ticket in your hand, and so I'm going to build a 3-story block like this on there. Why can't I have that consent? Well, you can always do that afterwards. You can actually make more out of these schemes than what we're necessarily allowing for at the moment. But we've got a nice solid baseline where this thing has ticked the planning boxes, it's ticked the viability assessment, so it works. It means you can afford to pay what the building's worth now. You can pay a bit more than that because you can share some of that upside and share the risk on that. You could then buy it based on that and go back in for another application and put
get super profit beyond what the profit is being shown.
Absolutely.
So really, a risk reward, isn't it? But at least you've got backstop of a solid reward for relatively low risk, and then you could actually push it harder if you wanted to. So absolutely. So kind of really kind of simple ways for doing all of that actually. So maybe we've undercooked the amount of profit in there, Simon. Probably should have I think so, yeah,
a bit more aggressive on it, really.
Well, maybe people might go, what is it? There's the title number there, AV87171. So maybe people can go and have a go at that one. So anyway, so that's
well,
it.
Plenty of it. Yeah, there's most of that road works, doesn't it? Really, to be honest. So there's plenty to be had a go at around there. Lots and lots in Bristol and all over the place, really. So do you want to do any more of those, Simon? Should we pick another one out of the?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's. I mean, the general principles there, isn't it? I guess it's the opportunities are there. People obviously, somebody's asking about London, aren't they, and things like that. And I guess the higher values, but higher conversion costs and the rest of it. But maybe we could talk about it later. Maybe on the Q&A if anyone wants to see anything else afterwards, Paul. I guess that may be better to sort of.
Yes, so Ginger sort of talk about that. Put a comment in the chat saying, should we only focus on high value areas? This is a really interesting sort of question I get asked quite a lot, and the answer for me is, I suppose it's probably quite obvious actually, because the answer for me is actually I think Middle England is much easier actually. So I think that the high value areas become quite competitive. I think with Class MA you've got a pretty open door, frankly, because I think there's a lot of opportunity that would historically been very difficult to unlock that Class MA now opens up for you. So I think you've got kind of your choice of areas with Class MA. Where I was at before things like Class MA came out is saying that, if you think sort of back to sort of 2 or 3 years ago, before all the big changes that came through in the planning legislation, how do I find a plot of land to build a house on, corner plots, back gardens, side gardens? Well, if you do that in a £600 a foot area, there's not a lot of it left. There's been lots of people kind of climbing all over that sort of space, trying to find that. But of course, if you go into a £400 a foot area or £350 a foot area, there's lots and lots of the country that is in that band. And there's enough money in the sales price to drive a land value. And also then there's more land around because it's been so heavily picked over. So there's more of it. There's fewer people doing it because they're spread out more. Because everybody goes, well, actually, how do I get a piece of land? Well, I go and find an area that's £600 a foot. I'll go and search in central Oxford and try and find some stuff there. And guess what? There's none of it left.
Yeah.
So I think that historically, I kind of quite like Middle England because actually the values stack up. There's plenty of opportunity there. There's a lot less competition around those areas. And actually sort of quite a fan of that. So I think you've got a choice when it comes to the new stuff. I think in the sort of more traditional stuff, then I think Middle England is a really interesting place to go for. So
there's just a comment. There's Anastasia saying I only do projects on 35%, but then that's the heat map for you, isn't on the left hand side. So we've categorized, just so they know, that we've categorized those Class MA as our predicted profit based on that sort of that calculation. So she'd only be interested in the 35% plus stuff at the bottom there, but that's fine because the percentage is also overlaid on top of the project. So if that's your that's your filter, then just go for those projects there. There's still 49%, 39%, 33%. You just wouldn't look at the ones at 33%, but obviously there's 104% and stuff. So we've kind of done that kind of filtering, graphically, haven't we, for them to say, right, I'm not going to do this and get too involved in stuff that doesn't meet my personal criteria. But I think that's the same thing, isn't it? Some people are interested, like their patch, and they know their patch. They're more comfortable on the resi values and the GDVs. They know what's going on, but then it's trying to find those opportunities. But like you said, those opportunities can be like hen's teeth, and you kind of be, it's very difficult sometimes to say, well, I'd love to go and do this in central Oxford, but hey presto, those sites have all been built by those colleges that are 1,000 years old or whatever and stuff like that. So there's not a lot of that opportunity. They're playing a long game rather than if you're trying to take something a sort of 5 to 7 year look at stuff. So then you have to move outside your patch. Then your comfort zone goes out in the GDVs, and then that's when you start to picking those, making sure that you're buying in the right areas. And that, and you've obviously got the we won't go into the resi exports, and it's constantly live, and it's also picking it up every day to see what's those resi values and are they shifting, what's going on. So
yeah, sure. I mean, let's just kind of just dwell on that a little bit. So I suppose what often happens when you try to scale out what you're trying to find, there's kind of two. There's one, you need to go and raise some funding. There's some tricks around how you find people to fund stuff, but then you end up sort of searching in a bigger area. So the point Simon's making is that your local knowledge that you've got about your local patch, sort of the further out you go, the less you know. It's just unfortunately the truth. And so, but what's kind of interesting, that was kind of very much the problem we had with the pub stuff, Simon, wasn't it? It's kind of, started off with 100 sites all around our local patch, kind of knew them a bit, kind of knew roughly what those areas were like and this sort of stuff. And then suddenly you get stuff that's down in Cornwall and stuff that's up in Scotland and this sort of stuff. A place we've never been to, no idea what it was all about. And so we had to go through this process of working out, well, what is local knowledge? What does it actually mean? And in reality, what it is it's understanding those neighbourhoods. That's the point of that residential value overlay. What's the good bits? What are the bad bits? Where do I want to stay away from? Where do I want to kind of actually focus on? And I want to make sure the comparables that I'm bringing forward and putting onto my appraisal are truly comparable with the site that I'm doing. I'm not pulling a comp from, as Simon said, in London, I'm looking at an ex-council estate and I'm pulling in a comp from over the road. Good example of that, I think the A40 or something goes through Notting Hill, or A4, I can't remember which one it is. And David Beckham lives one side of the road in some glorious sort of mansion, the other side of the road is next council estate, and the two are not comparable, and making sure that you're not bringing them to the wrong areas is kind of what that's all about. Frankly, make sure so we know what the area is, we know where the neighbourhood boundaries are, we know what those values are across those. We're bringing the right comparables in, and then of course, and Kevin's just saying there's a deprived area overlay as well, which we have got, which is next to the residential value one. Just pop that into chat.
The other thing is, of course, if there's the chance when you sort of get this stuff that's on market brought to you by an agent, you're always concerned they're only giving you, the sort of shiny stuff, aren't they? Say that, yeah, it's 500 quid a square foot because there were these shiny ones over here, but you're not necessarily getting the full marketplace, you're not getting the full feel for an area, and that's where you start to worry, and then you start to either chip away at your GDVs, or you maybe undercook your GDVs, you might overcook it. Either way is not particularly helpful. You kind of want predictability. So when you go into property, don't you? You want semi-predictability and semi-stability. If I do this and I add this to it, I get that out the back of it. Sometimes you make a little bit more, sometimes you make a bit less, but as long as the basics stack up, and you don't want to get caught out, do you? That's the key thing, isn't it, really? And I think if you get that objective view of the area through the data, rather than getting it filtered through a human being, you can sort of make your own decisions. And we're so used to that, aren't we, nowadays?
You could do both, can't you? So you can ask the professionals what they say, and that should then align with what the data is telling you. And if the two align, you're pretty comfortable that is the truth. And if they don't align, then there's just more research to be done as part of that. The other bit about local knowledge that I think is important is then just understanding, well, who are the right local agents that understand that marketplace, that kind of truly understand that locality. And then ultimately, what are the quoting prices and what are the sales prices for things that are similar to what we're looking at? And that's why we put this commercial availability into the platform, frankly, is that in essence, what this does is it allows us to go and see sort of quite quickly around this location. So if we're looking at offices down here, there's a bunch of offices. This little kind of light blue color means it's an office building. So there's an office up here that I can go and see is on the market with Savills, and go and have a look at the details of that. 1,200 square feet. So quite quickly I can work out what the price of that building might be. Perhaps I'll look one down here, another one down here is on the market with LSH. A bit smaller, that one, perhaps a little bit too small, that. Another one down here, 2,000 square feet.
But fundamentally, Paul, I go, well, look at this office, but I think it's worth 900,000. But what you don't want to do is certainly overpaying it for its existing use. Your residual value appraiser might say 900,000 £, but one is only worth 600,000 because the office, the office rate's only £10. So what it does, allows you just to go and see who are the movers and shakers, pick up the phone. You don't have to talk about the subject property because you're always worried about that, and say, look, I'm looking at a property in this area. What are the going? It might become empty. What's the going rates for the rents? And it's 11 quid a foot, it's 12 quid a foot. And you just but these are the movers and shakers for that office. What you don't want to do is go and ask clearly a residential area about agents about offices. You don't want office, because you're moving from one to the other. You want to talk about resi about resi, and you want offices about offices. And you don't want to go to both of them, about either one, individually about both use classes. So that just gets you a super strong feel for who's active in that area. But obviously don't tell them necessarily the detail around the subject property, because you never know where that might go. Suddenly
goes
from off market 1 version 2 to off market version 1 to that agent. So
tickles over that thing, and suddenly you become in a competitive world. But
or it goes on the market, even worse, and then you
drops over 2. So that's kind of, I think, giving you a sort of a sensible understanding of what this thing's all about, what the size of the opportunity is, how you can find some of that stuff, how you can get yourself comfortable that the values are correct. We've shown you how you can understand the marketplace that a property sits in. As Simon said, there is some residential comparables, some actual full-on comparables that will show you this building sold for this on this date, and it was this price per square foot. So you can kind of really dig into detail, take you through the particulars in this kind of stuff as well. So you can really
just the beauty of the letter sort of process is the fact that it might be a no today, but it may not be a no in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time, because the tenant might start going and say, well, actually, I've changed. I've decided I'm not going to renew the lease. And it's like, oh my goodness, now I'm an investor, I'm now going to have an empty building. I might have empty rates to pay. I might have to, this is not making me income. This is costing me money and stuff like that. So there's always a life cycle to a commercial lease. There's always a turnover. There's also an ownership. There's always things that happen to people. People retire. People, other things happen to families and stuff.
People get locked down in a global pandemic. Things like that.
So the thing is, isn't it? So as long as they've got the letter, you tend to not. I keep letters. We get written quite a lot about our properties still, and it's kind of like, well, you just file it away, put it in a little tray, you might, and it's kind of gone in your mind because you've read it. It's not an email that sort of goes in and out in a split second. You tend to read it. So you never know, maybe a second letter, in 3 months. And I think there's people asking about templates. We do have templates. We do have some strategies. I think we do that in the deals clinic, don't we? We have a lot of kind of best practice that we've seen as best practice that we've seen from other people to say, look, this is what I think you should do. This is the cycle in which you should send these letters out. I don't think it's the right time to go through it now. There's obviously the deals clinics. I think they're all online, aren't they? But there are little tips and tricks that you could use to optimize your chances of success. So that's the beauty of the letters. And put in your workflow, Paul, and then you can then obviously track what you sent and when. And
sure. I think it's kind of couple of points that are sort of worth dwelling on there. So one is sort of on the letter template itself. So kind of, you know, what is it you're going to send out to these people? One of the beauties of having, again, that sort of that off-market version 2, you know, kind of the letter campaigned work yourself, is that you can use templates that other people have created, like ourselves, and we can happily provide you with those. Very happy to share those with you. But of course, when you've got that volume of letters and volume of opportunities you can go and find, you can go and split test this. So you can go and you can send some letters out and you can see what response rates you get off the back of those. You can send some more out slightly different and see what response rates you get off the back of those. And you can change just small things within the letters and just see whether you get more or less in, you know, less interaction with the letters because of the way that you've written them, in effect. And so you can take people's word for it, or you can go and prove it for yourself. And that's one of the beauties of this, is you can really refine that down to a fine art and get the letter that really.
I think given the fact we're 55 minutes, I mean, I'd say that's a separate thing. The tips and tricks there, we're very happy to share that. We share that as well. And I think that there's lots of little things that I think you can do from our knowledge and from we're aggregating other people's, you know, knowledge to share with the community, so how they can improve. Is there anything we want to just sort of add to before we go to some Q&As or anything like that?
Yeah, so if anybody's interested in the Class MA strategy that's been demonstrated, that's actually available now. So you can buy that as $550 plus VAT for the year. It does actually form part. So
basically, isn't it, because it's fresh, it's just out on the 1st of August. I think we kind of got an introductory offer this month, so sort of, you know, that will very likely go up because obviously the data is very valuable. It's almost like a, you know, an introductory offer to our community, our sort of more of an exclusive thing to the people that we've sort of invited to this webinar. And you know, there is a deal at the moment, isn't there? I think because it's so fresh and it's kind of like the first month. But you know, I think we've been saying get in early and start trying to find the juicy deals and get there before anybody else, isn't it? Really, especially if it's the holidays and everybody else is sort of sitting on a beach somewhere, and get in early and start filtering out those stuff. Anyway, that was the opportunities, isn't it? So.
Sure. And then there is a commercial conversions bundle. So there's other stuff you can also do outside of Class MA, which is in effect strategy 1 plus ZA. So there's some airspace opportunities on similar commercial buildings, the old B1 buildings. We've got strategy 4, which is the shops and uppers, that class G in effect, what that's aiming at, and that's still possible as well. And there's the kind of the broader low value commercial buildings, residential area, strategy number 5 as well. And all of those have been bundled together this month into the sort of commercial conversions bundle. We're actually save 50% on that. So if anyone's interested in that, then feel free to get in touch. In fact, I have a link in the chat. Like I'm going to pop in the chat for that. In the meantime, let's jump into the live Q&A. So let's just, I'm going to drop in and put the link into the chat. Let me just stop sharing my screen for a moment. What I'd like to do, if you want to ask a question, then the way to do that is if I can get you just to look at the control panel on Zoom for me. At the bottom of that, if you're on a mobile, you have to just touch the screen and that'll sort of bring the control panel up. There's a raise hand button on that. If I get you to click on that raise hand button, then what I'll do then is we'll just bring you up and we'll get you. The
virtual mic, isn't it? The virtual mic in the room. So
the virtual mic, exactly. So I'm going to pop a link into the chat if anybody would like to talk to one of the team about the commercial conversions package, or indeed that Class MA strategy, then the link's in the chat there. We have just open up this. Just see if anybody would like to ask a question. Let's say just go into the chat, click the raise hand button. There's a few questions in the Q&A actually. So Anastasia we've dealt with. So Nadeem has said, can we trial the Elite Plus platform? I believe you can actually. I believe you can now have you get sort of 14 days on the Elite package, which excludes the strategies, but actually you can have a day's trial of the Elite Plus strategies. They don't give you very long on the Elite Plus because it is so powerful that you can fill a pipeline in not very long. It won't take very long to do that, Frank, because they'll give you some time on it, but it's pretty powerful stuff actually. There's another question. So Louisa said it's possible to find landlord has approved planning. Yes, absolutely. We're not going to cover that today, but there is planning export. There's also planning on the information panel. So really quick ways to do that. And actually some of the other stuff we were talking about a moment ago around finding investors and all that kind of good stuff. Again, you can do that through the planning export too. So we can cover that in a separate session. Let's just see if there's.
You want to raise the hand and ask a question. It's always nice to hear from people, but
So we've got a question about the video. So the video will come out separately. Ginger would like to ask us a question. I'll just see if we can unmute you. Ginger, just ask to unmute. There we go. Hi, Ginger. How you doing?
Hi, it's Johnny. The company's Ginger Brown.
Ginger Brown.
That's okay.
Is that your weekend name, Johnny?
Yes, yeah, I was going to say that's your weekend name, isn't it? Yeah.
I actually quite like it as a name. I might change my name to Ginger. It was just a quick question on the vacancy. Say if you're just purchasing the uppers, is it just that part that has to be vacant, or the whole building has to be vacant?
Yes, the part that you're applying the MA class MA to needs to be vacant.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe there's a little trick to this as well, actually, which is there's the new class G as well. So the new class G PD rights don't have this vacancy test on them. So I think there's kind of probably quite a cute way that would allow you to, if you kind of need to get some space empty, that you could use the class G to get the building empty in effect, and then apply your class MA. There's a bit of a trick around that I think could be kind of interesting.
Because like there's it's classic situation at the moment is like a bank, selling their upstairs ancillary space. So it would just need to be the ancillary space.
Yeah, you can apply.
That would have to be vacant.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
If that's the case, if it's just the upper part you're looking at, then the new class G would cover that. So you then get the change of use of the upper parts under class G into residential. If you're doing HMOs, you can then use class L to get HMOs. So you can get 2 flats above the bank, and then those 2 flats could go into 2 HMOs up to 6 beds under class L. But then of course you've got your planning ticket at that point. So you use your class G to get your residential upstairs, and then you could then go back in with the class MA application, or just a full application. Just say I want to.
Maybe we should ask that. I mean, this is sort of a tips and tricks on how to sort of break the system, isn't it? I suppose maybe that's a separate webinar. I don't know whether people want us to do that webinar. We'll do that as a sort of separate thing. But I think there's possibly
definitely
there's a few little bit of nuances that we've been talking about. How do you go from A to B to C to get to D rather than go straight from A to D? And I think there's probably quite a lot of opportunity there, but that's what the bundles bit, isn't it, Paul? But if people are happy, if people want us to do it, but just far away, and we'll put something in the sort of the next series or next.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, thanks, guys.
Brilliant, thank you.
Cheers, thank you,
Johnny. Yeah, Johnny. Go on.
Cheers, thank you.
Fabulous. There's a question actually, kind of interesting one from Yemi. She's just saying that spend too much time analysing a site, but the vendor just says no, I'm not interested. So finally make contact. Actually wasted so much time on that, and that's kind of frustrating. Any advice on that? Well, so the trick to that is a very quick review at the start. So it's kind of, I suppose, where the strategies become so useful. Really, is that because you're doing quite a lot of research on that particular building by just coming through on the strategy. So you've checked whether it's flood, whether it's listing, whether it's in the green belt, whether the numbers stack up, and all this kind of stuff by just switching on the strategy. So then when the owner comes back, you spent no time. You just clicked it, you've saved it, you've sent your letter out, and they come back and said, "I don't want to kind of do a deal on it." You've not really wasted any time on that. I think if you're spending an awful lot of time working sites out, that's where your problems are going to come. And I think what I would suggest you did is less of that upfront analysis. Use Nimbus
letters out and then see what the
headlines. Get your letters out, and then you spend time on the site to come back where you've got sort of a warm, fuzzy feeling from the owner saying they want to do something, and going forward that way. So I would really recommend that you do that. If you use the strategies, it's been done for you, so that would save you an awful lot of that. That kind of gets you the volume out. And then what's kind of good on that, I think, then as well, is that then you can sort of, if the balance of power flips. So because you send out so many letters and you get so much interest coming back, you can really kind of pre-qualify and work out, well, who do I want to go and work with, and which are the people that are saying the right things to me that give me confidence that I'm not going to waste my time on these things, rather than sort of just going forward with anything in effect, and kind of then sort of spending time in it and sort of.
I think the other thing, I think is a big thing, is you get emotionally attached to it. The more time you spend on the subject property, you become emotionally attached to the subject property. Whereas if you don't put that time in, and then you can make some decisions. We've done this. I mean, don't get me wrong. You get emotionally attached. You start to get pushed around a bit, and you can pay too much for it. You start to affect your appraisals. Your I suppose your logic brain doesn't sort of kick in because you get this emotional attached to it. So if you can cut that time down, you become less emotionally attached to the product, and then you can then get attached to it once you've got a proper you know, a relationship with the vendor, isn't it? And I think that that helps you as anybody that's trying to find the sites to have enough. I suppose it's choice, isn't it? You should have the choice, and then you can choose those that you can move forward on. It's always good to have 2 or 3 on the go rather than having just the one and getting emotionally attached to it because you spend, you know, days, weeks, months sort of living, you know.
Kind of interesting question then, sort of from Anastasia. So she's sort of found quite a lot of sites and then is sort of now looking for funding, basically. There's kind of a few tricks really. So one is if you haven't got the deposits yourself, so if you have got the deposits, then someone like Brickflow would be very useful for you in terms of making sure you're getting the right funding, sort of bank funding, kind of that, whether that's bridging finance or just out and out senior debt. If it's about the equity investment that you're looking for, then there's kind of some tricks around that. So for me, the people that are likely to invest in your schemes that you've got going forward are the ones that understand the assets, understand the developments you're putting forward. So for me, there's kind of 2 tricks to that. One is you can use the commercial comps, for example, on the Elite platform, which will show you a list of commercial properties that are sold in an area. You can save those to your workflow and you can write to those owners of those properties saying, I saw you bought some stuff near this particular property. And if you've got if you're interested in any more, then I've got some schemes that might be relevant for you. So what you know from the comps is they've got a track record, they've bought some stuff, and those things you could filter based on the kind of asset that you're buying. The other thing you can do is you can use the planning export for that as well. So you can say, well, actually, if my scheme is to convert an office to residential or something, you can go and pick a list of those out using the planning export for people that have bought similar schemes. So you run a search for those planning applications that have gone in, and you filter that for the ones that have been bought recently by a developer. So that's kind of the beauty of that planning export. It takes the planning application, links it to the owner and the design team that worked on it. So then you can say, well, actually, here's a list of developers that have bought sites, because we filtered it for that recently, and they've also submitted planning applications recently on those. So they will understand the scheme that you're looking at.
Also, if you're looking at buying a site, you can also say, this is an office building, this is a developer, and this is what they paid for it, this is how big it was. So it gives you a very good feel for what the existing use is for that, because fundamentally, you've always got the backstop. If you buy it, because it's a lower risk stuff, you know, there's a lower risk in terms of buying a building and knocking a building about if it stacks up than it is to go and knock it down and start from scratch, isn't it? So you've always got the backstop. If I bought an office building, what's the office building worth, and can I sell it as an office building even if it's vacant and stuff like that? So you've always got that backstop. There's not a bare piece of land that you can do something with. And I guess to understand what those different, I guess, backstop positions are by the data gives you a much stronger view, a greater feeling, a fuzzy, you know, a warm feeling that you're not going to go and lose your shirt on this
absolutely
project and stuff. So.
Then Yemi's also kind of put another question saying, apart from writing to the address of the property, any other forms of contact the owner? So it would be writing to the address of the owner rather than to the address of the property, obviously. There are things you can do. So some of the tricks around that, so things like the company exports and the company search will show you in companies, in the case of companies, they've got any of those buildings on the market, it will tell you which agents they've instructed on that. So you can then ring that agent and say, well, I saw that so-and-so bought this particular property, and actually, could you give them I see you're marketing this one over here for them, you know, could you give
there's 2 things we've done. We have built solutions to very much that issue, haven't we? Which is, you know, you've got the company export, which calls the company structure. So, you know, like our property family thing, it's in about 8 different companies, lots of SPVs, well, you know, sort of groups and that. So you don't know who's the commonality of that. So we built that kind of company structure that tells you who owns what and what group it is, and because it maybe wants to write to the parent company. You've also got, I guess, that you can click the button and say, well, who has this company sold any properties, or is it only going on the market with an agent? So you can go into that situation. So, well, look, I can't speak to them directly, but XYZ agency has got a building on the market for them. So go and talk to the agent. So you've always got direct to vendor or direct to the vendor's agent. That's another route into that. So we've got, again, I guess, Paul, do you cover this in your sort of tips and tricks in your so as
part of the Elite platform, there's a sort of 3-part training session where we talk about all this sort of stuff. So what are the ways in which you get in touch with the owners, and how can you work out who the right people are for your design team, for your connecting with the right owners, whether that's letters, whether that's trying to get, and I think it's kind of, there's a few tricks around the letters themselves as well. So how you write to a PLC versus how you write to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the owner, or how you write to Ginger Brown on that owns something on a.
Well, that's how we started with the pub. How we got into the pub industry. We owned the pub opposite the Galaxy in Burbage was opposite a site that we owned, wasn't it? And we wrote to them, to the head office. They did actually come back and say, go sling your hook. And it's kind of like, and then it's like, well, you could either push back, or I think what happened is we went by their agent. That's exactly what we did. So this is how we got into it. So you can sling your hook, or I think actually the knee-jerk was, I want £1 million for this £200,000 pub. Well, that's, and I think they were just doing a filter. If anybody's, silly enough to pay me £1 million for this, then I'll have a conversation. That was the sort of filter. But I think we went via an agent, didn't we? And then the agents brought the site manager, and then we end up doing the joint venture. So that was kind of like, so you kind of keep pushing, I suppose, rather than just getting pushed back. There are routes through, and of course that's what I suppose that methodology we've just built into Nimbus to say, look, you get kickback on the owner, try the owner's corporate structure, you try the directors, you can go to company's house and see directors, are they companies of other companies, have those companies got agents acting for them? So get pushed back, try the agent to get to them, as long as you obviously keep your
that black book, isn't it? It's kind of property is a relationship game, and it's just leveraging that black book of how do I get in touch with the right people. That
well, it comes back to that find the opportunities, assess the viability, then connect to the different stakeholders. And how do I connect to them?
Fabulous.
Any other questions that anybody wants to ask, or do you think?
Yes, I've got one actually. I've got one. So the question I would like to ask is, so there's a harebrained idea in Nimbus. Well, we'll see if it's harebrained or not. We'll see whether it's a harebrained idea or not. But there's a question internally about whether that spreadsheet that we have, that strategy that we have for Class MA, is should we just package it up and flog it? Now, we'd like to ask you whether you think that's a good idea or not. So we're going to launch a little poll, and you can tell us what you think. Do you think we should just flog the whole data set on the market, or should we not do that and do what we're doing, support our community and help you guys find opportunity?
I think
this looks pretty unanimous, Simon. This looks pretty unanimous.
So I'll just do the pros and cons very quickly. I think one of the thoughts is if you give it to a single company and probably include some letters, then of course so it's almost like, do you get the second letter is the one that the vendor talks to you about, or do you almost get that one company to go and write to them and say, look, here we go, and then it sort of instigates that kind of, oh, I've had 2 letters now, I want to go and start thinking about selling this. So is it a sort of double prod to the vendor, and then you sort of get one company to go in effect? We'll obviously work with them and send maybe 80,000 letters out for them to get that prod out to go, and then you come on with the second letters? Or is that going to undermine the value to our community, which is SME developers, investors, because most of them certainly can't afford to buy the whole data set? So it's kind of like, is this a harebrained idea, or is this going to help our community to be able to sort of give one large company a leg up to sort of maybe get there early, but it's almost second mover advantage, because that one company, there's no single company that's going to go and buy 80,000 properties, because it's just not sustainable. But they might go and buy, I don't know, 10, 100, and there's still then 85,500 properties.
Yeah.
So that was the thought. Is it going to help, or is it going to hinder? I guess, isn't it really? So
yeah, sure. Well, the kind of the way the poll sort of moved changed.
It shifted. Have I persuaded
when you start speaking, it changed. I wonder if I should rerun it again. I wonder if I can rerun it. Let's just end it and let's see if I can.
Oh, can you record what we actually said? So yeah, I think just
I'm going to relaunch it. Let's just find out. Let's relaunch what we said. So we had a pretty conclusive answer a second ago, so I was quite enjoying this. Apologies. Had quite a conclusive answer at the start, the first time round, saying that we shouldn't, and then we had a few people saying, well, actually, maybe you should. So it changed. It's sort of
there's method in the madness. This is not to undermine the community. This is to say, look, can we work with one company to go and chip, to start chipping along all these people rather than having to do so. So maybe we have to say 2 letters go out to be able to make things, to start getting a relationship with somebody. Maybe we work with one company who's prepared to almost fund that first letter campaign, chip it along, and then the next lot of people from the community can go and do it. But it was just a no twice from that. So yeah, it's just a harebrained idea that we have these, don't we, Paul? Sometimes over a
when you say we,
over a pint.
When you say we, whose idea was who's fabulous? Well, I think we have an answer. I think we have a, Kevin wants it. Kevin said no twice, obviously. So
okay,
we've got one
well,
extra no.
we won't distribute the answer yet. So I'm not gonna. This is no, just again, it's his feedback, isn't it? We think we can help. If we think it's going to hinder, then we don't want to do it, do we? So we're here to help. We're all about helping people to succeed in their investment and development goals, and the last thing we want to do is to hinder that. We're trying to help that community to be successful, and it's more to say, can it help be successful rather than the way. But that's why we sort of launch it and get some feedback. But let's do that. We might ask it a couple more times, but I think it's a unanimous decision. And we certainly won't want to do anything that's going to cause anybody problems. So thank you for the feedback. I think
it's brilliant. That's awesome, fabulous, awesome. Well, hopefully that's been useful. So if you've got any links, if anybody wants anything, well, I think what we've achieved now, I think we've answered the question. We know how big this opportunity is. We found out how we can find these things. So I think all that's left for me to do is to thank my dear brother for joining us today. Thanks, Simon. It's been good fun.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's good.
And then thank you to all of you for your time today and for watching today. Had a great time. I've been Paul Davis. That's been Simon Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.